Illinois, 1976. Cold case solved. Arrest stuns a Chicago neighborhood. A half-century of whispers ends with the soft click of handcuffs. The name on the warrant is Frank Lanski, age 73. Home, the west side of Chicago. Victim, Ellen DeLuca, 19, nursing student. Solve mechanism, forensic genealogy from a trace on a sweater, verified by a discarded coffee cup. Outcome, first-degree murder charges. 6:30 in the morning. June heat already in the air. The block on West Augusta wakes to blue strobes and the thrum of idling engines. A dog barks once and goes quiet. A neighbor's radio leaks an old Sinatra tune through a screen door. Two detectives climb 3 groaning steps to a brick bungalow that never made the history books until now. The door opens. The man in the doorway blinks against the light. Thin hair, watery eyes, a windbreaker zipped to his throat like a habit. Detective Denise Morales says his name. He nods as if she has called roll. He turns. He sets his hands behind his back before anyone asks. Metal on bone. A cuff ratchets. A camera clicks. The block exhales. From the sidewalk, a woman in house shoes crosses herself. From a porch, someone whispers, "He fixed the boiler at the school." Another voice answers, "We never knew him." At the afternoon podium, the language is careful. Chicago Police. State Lab. Partnership. Persistence. Morales stands square to the microphones. Through advanced DNA testing and forensic genealogy, we linked the suspect to biological material collected in 1976. The probability of an unrelated match is effectively 0. One line with teeth, one line with mercy. That is how you talk when a city is listening. What is the evidence? A speck on a sweater. A profile grown from fragments. A family tree that narrows to a single living branch. A coffee cup from a trash can on Chicago Avenue, swabbed and sealed before the lid closed. Numbers that say the odds are beyond counting. 1 to more than the number of stars you can name. Reporters ask if this could be incidental contact. Morales answers the way scientists like. Context rules. Placement rules. The sweater was the victim's. The location was intimate. The time frame was the night she vanished. The suspect lived 2 blocks from where her car appeared and walked past that park for years. Benign contact does not live inside a knot of coincidences. The arrest lands like thunder in an old stone city. Chicago knows crime. Chicago knows grief. This is different. This is a door from 1976 swinging open into 2025. The light hurts everyone's eyes. Tony DeLuca stands on a lawn in Cicero and tries not to cry on camera. He is in his 60s now, thick hands, soft voice. Ma and Dad saved a seat for her at Christmas. I never stopped hoping. There is a photograph in his pocket, creased and warm from the day. Mary Ellen with a textbook. Mary Ellen with that silver watch she wore face in so it would not scratch. The same watch that turned up later on a bench miles away. Place unknown to her daily life. Purpose unknown to anyone. No prints. No blood. Only the neat fact of it, like a sentence that ends too soon. Inside the cold case unit, younger officers stand under fluorescent hum and gather around a corkboard faded by years of tape. Morales pins a new face near the center. Frank Lanski. Beside him, a Polaroid of Mary Ellen, smile wide, hair parted down the middle. 30 stacked reports, 5 field notebooks, 1 city map with rusted pushpins. And between all that paper, one voice that never got tired of saying, "Keep it." Her name was Carla Ruiz. Evidence clerk. Rookie in 1976. She packed the sweater in acid-free paper when film was still king and computers were a rumor. She wrote, "Sample B, sweater" in tidy script, and put it into a locker that clicked shut and did not care if anyone remembered. She retired in the 90s. She gardened. She watched her shows. She never knew that her neat handwriting would grip a killer by the wrist 50 years later. Time did what killers hope for. It made people forget. Then, science remembered. The lab story is simple, on camera, and hard in real life. Technicians teased a partial profile from a biological whisper. Next-generation sequencing stretched what little was left. Genealogists built a forest from a leaf and started trimming. Second cousin once removed. branches cut, a trunk left standing. Investigators follow paperwork the way hounds follow wind. Birth certificates, property cards, yearbooks. A life that never left Chicago, circling the same 8 blocks like a commuter train. They needed a standard. They waited by a trash can with a lid on a spring. A coffee cup fell in with a hollow sound that felt like an answer. Back at the bench, the numbers locked. 1 to a number you cannot read in a breath. It was not luck. It was storage. It was patience. It was the refusal of a city to misplace a girl. Body cam video fills the evening news. The bungalow's front room is small. A brown recliner. A crocheted Afghan. Family snapshots on a shelf. Faces in frames that never guessed they would watch this. Morales reads the warrant. Lanski asks if this is about the girl. The sentence lands with a dull weight. A lawyer will later say, "People say many things when startled." A prosecutor will later say, "People do not say that." A squad door shuts. The block returns to its morning. A garbage truck grinds past. A sprinkler ticks across a patch of grass the sun has already decided to burn. On the sidewalk, a boy on a bike circles the light bar until his mother calls him inside. The press conference shifts to the practical. What comes next? Booking. Bond court. An arraignment date. No further comment. Reporters want the old case summarized. A few facts are fit for a short memory. 1976. A pale blue Chevy Vega found near Garfield Park. Doors locked. Purse inside. Keys in the ignition. Mary Ellen, gone between campus and home. No one saw her enter a car. No one heard a scream that made sense. Chicago moved, and the case stood still. Someone asks the question that always tastes like metal. Why did it take this long? Morales gives the only answer honest enough to stand. Because we did not have the tools then. Because a clerk cared. Because a family would not fold the table and put away the chair. Tony DeLuca listens from the back of the room. He thinks about that chair. He thinks about how his father could never bring himself to sell the Vega, how he kept it under a tarp that smelled like rain and oil, how he would lift the corner and look at the seats like they might speak. He thinks about the blank space where her watch should have been on her wrist. He does not say any of this to the microphones. He says, "Thank you." He says, "Please see this through." By dusk, the block that watched the arrest has converted the moment into story. Stories travel porch to porch. He kept to himself. He was kind to dogs. He shoveled everyone's sidewalk after big snows. He walked past the park every night after work in 1976. He was a custodian at the school. He helped with the boiler. He once fixed the light in the choir loft at St. Mark's. The catalog of ordinary kindness builds and then collapses under its own weight. It is tempting to mythologize a city and the year it had. Chicago in 1976 was concrete and smoke and the soft confidence of steel. The Sears Tower was still young and arrogant. Corner bars held together blocks the way mortar holds brick. Disco floated from open windows with box fans humming in them. Police radios crackled like summer cicadas. People trusted their streets and their neighbors, and the luck that comes from routine. You do not need myth. You need a girl with a plan for the next day, a lab that kept an envelope shut, a detective who decided the city's memory was her job. Morales is not the first name in the file. There are many. One belongs to a man who once knocked on the suspect's door and took down a polite statement in 1976 and wrote, "Cooperative, no further action," because not every story shows its ending in Chapter 1. Another belongs to a woman in a gray cardigan who worked evidence like a craft and labeled things as if labels could hold back time. Another belongs to a forensic analyst named Kendra Lewis, who watched numbers resolve on a screen close to midnight and sat very still so the moment would not hear her moving. She called Morales. Morales called the state's attorney. The state's attorney asked 3 questions in 5 minutes. Chain of custody. Statistical weight. Alternative explanation. Answers held. There is always a defense. Maybe he touched the sweater earlier. Maybe he brushed past her. Maybe they stood in line at the same counter. The counter-argument is clean. Who, when, where. A stranger's benign contact does not explain a lattice of links across decades, across blocks, across that parked Vega with a purse inside and a watch that walked away. That watch. You can point to it and still not be sure. It appears on a bench 3 miles east, weeks after the disappearance. Set face up. Silver band. No prints. No sweat. No skin cells worth a miracle. Someone wanted it to be seen. Taunt, trophy, penance. Pick a noun. The bench does not care which one you choose. At the jail, a deputy takes the windbreaker and a belt and trades them for county cloth and a number. Lanski says nothing useful. He asks for water. He asks for the time. He asks if his dog has been fed. The clock makes all these questions smaller than the room. On television that night, anchors say the same words in different voices. After nearly 50 years, a break in the case of Mary Ellen DeLuca. A clip rolls. A man looks back at a house like it is the last safe thing he will see. Graphics bloom. DNA. Genealogy. Cold case. Viewers nod in living rooms from Rogers Park to Bridgeport. They have heard these words before. They have not heard these names in a long time. In a basement den, a retired detective watches with his hands clasped the way people pray when they have forgotten the words. He remembers the day they found the Vega. He remembers the sound the door made when they opened it. He remembers how the city looked at him for answers he did not have. He does not call anyone. He lets the broadcast end and listens to his own house. In a tiny apartment, a woman once in Mary Ellen's study group holds a yearbook that always felt like a promise and runs a finger down a page until the ink shines. In a parish office, a priest pulls an old mass card from a drawer and sets it on a desk and looks at it for a long time without reading. In a lab, Kendra Lewis shuts down the sequencer and writes a note for the morning because she knows memory is a debt the work keeps collecting. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you are in the right place. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. We need the ordinary day before the news vans. We need the walk between campus and a third-floor walk-up that should have been safe. We need a park with a car and a purse, and the hush of a city that did not yet know it was missing someone. We need 1976, and we need to hear it like a song half remembered. Before DNA became a word in living rooms. Before technicians spoke in ratios and probabilities. Before an arrest on a hot morning. There was just Mary Ellen. There was just Chicago. There was just a night that ended too soon. Time gave the case new tools. People kept the case alive long enough to use them. A clerk's tidy label held the door. A lab's quiet miracle turned the knob. A detective pushed. The rest of this story runs backward now. From charges to reason. From handcuffs to hands. From one street in 2025 to one street in 1976. We start with the outcome because that is how you respect the years. We rewind because that is how you understand the day. We stay with her because that is how you honor a name that might have been a nurse on a long night shift, a neighbor in a lobby, a mother at a park. It took almost 50 years for the city to say the words out loud. It took almost 50 years for the right person to hear them. It took almost 50 years for a spec to speak. Now it has. Now, we listen. If you are new here, subscribe. We tell stories that start with an answer and then earn it. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. Before she was evidence, before she was a headline, she was just Mary Ellen. 19 years old. Nursing student. Third-floor walk-up on Taylor Street, west of the Loop. A girl who liked order, color-coded notes, and early mornings. Chicago, 1976. A city between decades. Factories still humming, but the air already tasted like the end of an era. Steel and diesel. Summer sweat and cigarette smoke. You could hear the L train from her kitchen window, a hollow screech every 9 minutes, so regular it became a kind of heartbeat. Mary Ellen DeLuca lived there with her parents and 2 younger brothers in a red brick apartment building that leaned slightly toward the street. Inside, everything smelled like starch and lemon polish. Her mother, Anna, ironed everything, even pillowcases. Her father, Sal, worked for the city transit yard, the kind of man who could fix anything except what mattered most later. They were ordinary people in a city that prized ordinary. Church on Sundays. Sox games on the radio. Supper at 6, sharp. Mary Ellen was the oldest, the steady one. Her brothers called her the lieutenant because she planned every day down to the hour. She kept index cards for exams, grocery lists, birthdays. She wrote thank you notes for small kindnesses. Her friends teased her for it, but they also came to her when life got messy. She had a way of organizing chaos until it seemed temporary. She was saving money from her diner job, Rita's on Halstead, the one with the blue neon coffee cup in the window. She worked Saturday mornings, poured coffee for construction workers, and hung her apron in the back next to a peg labeled Mary E. She dreamed of becoming a pediatric nurse, said she liked the honesty of children, how they didn't pretend they weren't scared. Her handwriting curled at the edges, neat but full of personality, the kind that made even grocery lists look cheerful. And she always wore a silver wristwatch with a thin band. She wore it on the inside of her arm so the face wouldn't scratch. That tiny habit became her signature. And later, it became a riddle. In 1976, Chicago was loud with promise and noise. The Sears Tower was new, a vertical dare to the rest of the country. Taxi horns and disco beats shared the air with church bells and sirens. The neighborhoods were stitched together by corner taverns, Italian bakeries, and gossip exchanged over plastic counters. It was a working city, proud and tired, and Mary Ellen fit it perfectly hopeful but practical. Her friends called her M.E. They say she had a smile that could break tension in any room. One of them, Kathy Ramirez, still remembers the way Mary Ellen walked brisk, like she had somewhere important to be, always. Even her laugh was organized, Kathy once told detectives, years later. She laughed on purpose. Mary Ellen had a small circle, Kathy, Lisa Cho from her anatomy class, and her roommate, Joan, who worked part-time at the campus library. They studied together, went to the movies at the Biograph, the same theater where Dillinger met his end decades earlier. They were normal college girls with bell-bottom jeans and second-hand leather purses, chasing the kind of independence their mothers had only dreamed about. The DeLuca apartment was a half-hour bus ride from campus. Mary Ellen's schedule was a loop: school, diner, home. She didn't party much. Didn't drink. Didn't date often. Not because she was shy, because she didn't like wasting time. Every night she would lock her door, set her watch on the bedside table, and write in a small blue notebook. No big secrets inside, just fragments of days' exam scores, reminders, little pieces of life that prove it happened. Her last entry, the night before she vanished, reads, "Study with Lisa. Call Mom about Sunday dinner. Don't forget sweater." 3 short lines. 1 missing ending. The city she lived in could be beautiful and cruel in the same hour. Streetlights hummed and flickered. Pigeons crowded windowsills. You could buy roasted peanuts from a cart and hear someone arguing about the Cubs at every corner. It was alive in a way that makes danger hard to see. Mary Ellen walked through it like it belonged to her, a city that hadn't yet learned how to be suspicious of its own streets. She drove a pale blue Chevy Vega, bought secondhand from her uncle for $600. It rattled above 50 miles an hour and smelled faintly of gasoline, but it was hers. Freedom, on 4 dented doors. She washed it every Sunday in the alley behind their building, even in winter, even when the hose froze halfway through. She said clean things ran better. Maybe she was right. Her parents didn't worry much. They'd raised her to be careful. They didn't know that careful sometimes isn't enough. On Taylor Street, neighbors still remember the sound of her heels on the stairs, 2 quick beats, then the turn of the key. They remember the smell of her coffee drifting down the hall before sunrise. They remember how polite she was to everyone, even the landlord, even the mailman who always delivered bills late. Ordinary details, filed away in ordinary minds, waiting decades to mean something. Chicago that spring was warm early. The kind of warmth that makes people linger outside after sunset, talking with arms crossed against the breeze. Garfield Park bloomed too soon, the grass patchy but determined. Street lamps glowed orange over basketball courts and cracked pavement. Somewhere, music played from a portable radio, the kind that ran on D batteries. It was a song about love lasting forever. It played while a girl named Mary Ellen walked home. She didn't know she was about to become a story told in past tense. She didn't know her name would sit in a file box for nearly 50 years. She didn't know that a sweater, folded neatly in evidence paper, would one day tell everyone what she couldn't. For now, she was just 19. She had a test on Monday and dinner plans on Sunday. She had a watch ticking steady against her pulse. She had a city that still felt safe. But every story like this starts with a place that thinks it's immune. Every case begins as an ordinary night. Every ghost starts out alive. Next time, we'll follow her into that night, the last normal day, the last phone call, the last streetlight she passed under before Chicago learned what it had lost. Friday, April 9th, 1976. The sky over Chicago was clear, a thin spring sunlight that made the city look cleaner than it was. You could smell rain somewhere in the distance, but the streets were dry, the air electric with weekend promise. Mary Ellen DeLuca started her morning the way she always did: coffee, toast, and the small blue notebook open on the kitchen table. She wrote a few words: anatomy quiz at 10, diner after class, study with Lisa. Then she tucked the notebook into her bag and left her apartment. Her mother was already at work. Her father had left before sunrise. The apartment was quiet enough to make her footsteps sound important. On the bus ride to campus, she sat by the window, watching the storefronts past the tailors, the butchers, the record shop, with posters of Fleetwood Mac and Elton John taped crooked in the window. A man in a corduroy jacket nodded off beside her, his newspaper sliding to the floor. She picked it up and set it on his lap without a word. At 10, she sat for her anatomy quiz. She scored a 92. Her professor wrote "excellent grasp of systems" in the margin. It would be the last grade she ever received. After class, she met her friend Lisa Cho at the Student Center for lunch, turkey sandwiches, and orange soda in glass bottles. They talked about summer plans, about maybe finding jobs at the same hospital. Lisa would later remember that Mary Ellen seemed distracted, but not worried. She kept glancing at her watch, as if measuring something invisible. Around 1, she stopped by Rita's diner, dropped off her pay stub, talked briefly with her manager, who asked if she could cover a shift next weekend. She said yes. She liked keeping busy. She liked feeling useful. At 2:30, she left the diner and drove the pale blue Vega east on Roosevelt Road toward campus. A friend from class saw her at a red light, waving from the sidewalk. She smiled, waved back, and the light turned green. That's the last verified sighting before nightfall. By 5, she called her mother. Said she'd be studying late, might grab a sandwich before heading home. Her mother told her to be careful, that the buses were running slow because of construction. Mary Ellen said, "I know, Ma, I'll be fine." It was a familiar exchange the kind families have when no one believes it could be their last. At 7:30, her roommate Joan left for the library. She expected Mary Ellen home around 10. There was a movie they planned to watch on the small black and white TV, a rerun of The Streets of San Francisco. Joan would later say she left the porch light on for her. Sometime between 10 and 11, Mary Ellen packed her books, left campus, and began driving west toward home. A witness, a gas station attendant on Pulaski, remembered a young woman matching her description, buying a pack of gum, and asking for directions to Taylor Street. She seemed calm. He remembered her smile, polite, hurried, like someone trying not to keep anyone waiting. At 11:20, traffic thinned. The city's hum softened. The Vega moved through patches of light and shadow, through intersections that were still safe then. She passed Garfield Park, the big one with the conservatory glass shining like a moonlit cage. That was close to home. Close enough that she should have made it. But she didn't. At midnight, her father looked out the window, checking for headlights that never appeared. At 12:30, he walked downstairs, convinced she'd be coming up the steps any minute. At 1, he drove the route from campus himself, scanning shoulders and alleys, stopping twice to look at parked cars under broken street lamps. Each time, the engine ticked in the silence like a heartbeat that had lost its rhythm. At 6 in the morning, a patrol officer found a pale blue Vega parked at the edge of Garfield Park, near a row of elm trees that leaned toward the road. The car was locked. Purse on the front seat. Keys in the ignition. No damage. No struggle. It looked like someone had simply stepped out and vanished. Detective Alan Marino was first on scene, 27 years old, still believing that hard work always led somewhere. He circled the car, wrote notes in a small spiral pad. Inside, he found a textbook, a sweater folded on the back seat, a notebook half open. On one page, 3 words, "Call Mom Sunday." He closed it gently, as if afraid to wake it. The trunk was clean. The tires were dusty but unremarkable. He ran his hand over the hood, cool. The car had been parked for hours. By 8 a.m., the DeLuca family was at the station, faces gray from exhaustion and disbelief. Her mother clutched the handle of her purse like a lifeline. Her father kept saying, "She doesn't do this. She's responsible." The words sounded like he was trying to convince the universe, not the police. Flyers were printed that afternoon, a black and white photograph taken at a church picnic the summer before. Mary Ellen in sunglasses, holding a paper cup, laughing at something just outside the frame. The caption, "Missing, please call Chicago police with information." By evening, volunteers were combing Garfield Park with flashlights, calling her name into the wind. One neighbor said he thought he heard someone yelling around midnight, but it might have been kids. Another said he saw a dark sedan parked nearby but couldn't remember the plate. The fog had rolled in off the lake after midnight, thick enough to swallow sound. In the city, a missing person doesn't always make the news. But a 19-year-old nursing student, bright, local, and beloved, did. By the next morning, her face was on every newspaper rack from Cicero to Evanston. Her father retraced the route again and again, driving the same loop until the gas gauge hovered near empty. Each time he passed the park, he slowed, as if expecting to see her appear, waving, smiling, explaining everything. He never did. In the precinct, Marino pinned a map to the wall. He drew a red circle around Garfield Park, another around the diner, a third around the campus. 3 points that should have connected into a triangle. Instead, they formed a question mark. That night, the DeLuca apartment glowed until dawn. No one slept. On the kitchen table, the phone sat waiting for a call that didn't come. The coffee pot stayed full, untouched. The watch she'd worn every day lay on her dresser, its silver band catching the early light. Only later would anyone realize it wasn't hers. Her own was missing. By Sunday morning, it wasn't a delay. It was a disappearance. And by Sunday night, it was something darker. What began as worry had hardened into dread, and the city that had always seemed so full of sound suddenly felt too quiet. That was the last normal day. The last one that felt whole. After that came the search, the panic, and the long silence that would last nearly 50 years. Garfield Park, April 10th, 1976. Early morning. The sun hadn't quite cleared the skyline, and the grass was still silver with dew. 2 patrol cars idled on the shoulder, their red lights turning slow circles across the trees. Detective Alan Marino stood beside the pale blue Vega, notebook open, tie crooked, eyes red from no sleep. He'd seen wrecks, robberies, beatings, all the usual city sins. This one felt different. Too clean. Too quiet. He circled the car again. Purse on the front seat. Wallet inside. Driver's license, library card, a few singles, a pay stub from Rita's diner. Everything neat, deliberate, like she'd placed it herself. The sweater on the back seat was folded, not tossed. The key in the ignition turned easily, no resistance. No sign of forced entry. No drag marks in the dirt. No blood. No broken glass. The Vega looked like someone had parked it there to be found. Marino crouched, ran his hand over the front fender. The metal was cool, beaded with dew. That meant the car had been sitting since before midnight. He scribbled a note. Time of last use, unknown. A jogger passed on the opposite sidewalk, slowed, looked over. Marino lifted a hand. Police business, he said, and the jogger nodded, sped up, pretending not to look back. People did that, curiosity colliding with fear. He dusted the door handles with powder. Nothing clear enough to lift. Just smudges. He took photos anyway, Polaroid flash swallowing the early light. A uniformed officer approached. Sir, the parents are here. Marino turned. Sal and Anna DeLuca stood behind the yellow tape. Sal's work boots left tracks in the grass. Anna clutched her rosary so tight, the beads left marks on her fingers. Marino walked to them slowly, trying to find words that didn't exist yet. He showed them the car. Anna gasped. Sal just stared. This doesn't make sense, he said quietly. She was supposed to come home. Marino nodded. He'd heard that sentence before. He still didn't know what to do with it. By 9 a.m., crime scene techs arrived, 2 men with a trunk full of cameras, brushes, and brown paper bags. They cataloged everything. The sweater, the notebook, the textbook, the purse. Each item sealed, labeled, boxed. Someone mentioned the lack of dirt on the driver's side floor mat. That meant Mary Ellen hadn't walked through the park mud. So where had she gone? Around 10, reporters began to gather. A missing girl in a city that prided itself on being tough that made headlines. Flashbulbs popped. Questions flew. Marino said nothing. He wasn't ready to say the word abduction. Not yet. By noon, Garfield Park filled with volunteers, neighbors, classmates, strangers carrying homemade sandwiches and thermoses of coffee. They moved in lines through the grass, calling her name. Dogs from the K-9 unit sniffed and barked, but the trail ended halfway down a service road near the conservatory fence. After that, nothing. Her scent vanished like it had been cut with scissors. That afternoon, Marino stood by the Vega again. He opened the trunk one last time. Empty. He closed it slowly, leaned against the metal. He looked at the reflection of the trees in the rear window and thought how strange it was that the world could keep looking normal while someone was missing from it. At 4, the car was towed to the city impound for processing. He rode behind it in his sedan, watching the Vega sway slightly with each bump, the tow chain clinking like handcuffs. At the lot, technicians combed through it under fluorescent lights. They found a few long hairs on the passenger seat, dark, consistent with Mary Ellen's. No foreign hairs. No fingerprints that matched anyone else. It was as if whoever took her had worn gloves. They checked the gas tank. Half full. Checked the odometer. No recent spikes. Nothing. A vehicle that went nowhere and said nothing. By early evening, the department officially labeled the case a missing person investigation. Marino didn't like that phrasing. Missing implied choice. He didn't see any choice here. He gathered his team in the briefing room, 2 detectives, 4 patrol officers. They tacked maps to the wall, plotted her last known route, highlighted the park perimeter. They called the hospitals, the morgue, the bus depot. No trace. He told them to canvass the area around the park. Talk to everyone. Someone had to have seen her, or the car, or something. That night he drove back to the DeLuca apartment to check in. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and floor wax. The front door was open. Inside, the family sat around the kitchen table, untouched plates of food in front of them. Anna stared at a small photograph, propped against a salt shaker, Mary Ellen at 17, holding a birthday cake. Sal's hands were black with grease. He hadn't gone to work. He didn't plan to. "Do you think she's still alive?" he asked quietly. Marino hesitated. "I think we'll find her," he said. He left out the rest one way or another. At home, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the car, the sweater folded on the back seat, the key turned halfway in the ignition like someone had meant to start it again but never got the chance. He thought about the park big enough to hide anything, even a person. He decided he'd go back at dawn. And he did. Saturday morning, April 10th. The city was already awake. Sirens in the distance. The smell of bread from a nearby bakery. Marino walked the perimeter of Garfield Park, eyes scanning for tire tracks, footprints, any sign of disturbance. He found nothing but bottle caps and cigarette butts. Then he noticed a small patch of flattened grass about 50 yards from where the Vega had been parked. He crouched, brushed his fingers over it. The ground was soft, disturbed recently. Not a grave too shallow, too small, but something heavy had rested there. A body, maybe, or a bundle. He marked it with a flag, called for the techs. They photographed it, took soil samples, bagged a small fragment of fabric they found nearby, gray, synthetic, impossible to identify. Later, it would test negative for blood, but in that moment, it felt like a clue. By afternoon, the search widened. The city's newspapers ran the headline, "Nursing student vanishes car, found in park." A photo of Mary Ellen smiling, hair loose in the wind. Underneath, a quote from her father, "She doesn't just disappear." That night, Chicago held its breath. Police radios hummed. The DeLuca family waited by the phone. Detective Marino stared at the city map until the lines blurred. He told himself this was just the beginning, that they'd find her soon, that maybe she was hurt, maybe scared, but alive. He didn't know that he was already standing at the edge of 50 years of silence. By Sunday, April 11th, 1976, Chicago had turned anxious. The story of Mary Ellen DeLuca's disappearance spread from block to block, traveling faster than the newspapers could print. At first, people assumed it would resolve quickly, a misunderstanding, a night spent at a friend's place, something small that would turn out to be nothing. But by the third day, the word missing had started to mean something else. Flyers appeared on light poles, stapled over old garage sale posters. Mary Ellen's face, smiling, sunlit, caught in mid-laughter, looked down on commuters, on factory workers, on kids walking to school. The photo made her look alive in a way that hurt to see. Garfield Park became the center of everything. Police cordoned off an area around where her car had been found. Reporters stood behind the tape, microphones pointed like weapons. Detective Alan Marino stood in front of them, his eyes hollow from no sleep. He gave the same answer every time. "We're pursuing all leads." He didn't say there weren't any. By Monday, the department had organized a full-scale search. 50 volunteers from the neighborhood. Firefighters, students, off-duty cops. They walked shoulder to shoulder through the park, through the alleys, through the abandoned greenhouse near the conservatory where teenagers sometimes went to drink. They found cigarette butts, beer cans, a rusted bicycle frame, and nothing else. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a footprint that mattered. Helicopters circled overhead, blades chopping the cool April air. News crews filmed from the rooftops. Chicago had seen violence before, but not like this, not something that felt so intimate, so sudden, so without reason. Inside the DeLuca apartment, time had stopped. Anna sat at the kitchen table with the phone cradled in her hands, waiting for it to ring. Sal paced the hallway, his shoulders tight, his jaw locked. Their younger son stayed quiet, too young to understand that quiet could be dangerous. Neighbors brought casseroles and coffee, as if food could fix absence. Anna thanked them, smiled politely, and then forgot to eat. That night, Marino met with his team in the precinct basement, a small room with bad lighting and a smell of dust and coffee grounds. Maps covered the walls. Every intersection along Mary Ellen's route had been circled in red. They'd interviewed 20 people. None had seen her after 10:30. 2 witnesses near Garfield Park said they'd noticed a car idling around midnight. Dark-colored sedan, maybe green, maybe blue. Both admitted the fog was heavy that night. One of them thought they'd heard a woman's voice, faint, but couldn't tell if it was shouting or laughing. Details blurred by distance and guilt. Marino stared at the map and felt the investigation tightening like a knot pulled too fast. They had too little to work with, and too many people watching. The mayor's office wanted updates. The press wanted quotes. The family wanted answers. He had none to give. By Tuesday, the search had moved beyond Garfield Park. Teams fanned out toward the expressway, underpasses, the rail yards, the industrial edges of the city. The police divers checked the lagoon. Nothing. Forensic teams combed the Vega again, this time under ultraviolet light. Still, nothing. No fingerprints but hers. No foreign fibers. The sweater from the back seat went into evidence storage. Marino noted the tag on the bag, Sample B, sweater. He didn't know that Carla Ruiz, the young evidence clerk who wrote those words, was about to save the case 50 years later. That week, the local news ran nightly updates. A smiling anchor named Jack Montgomery opened each broadcast with the same line. Still no sign of missing nursing student Mary Ellen DeLuca. He said it like a prayer that had stopped working. The city's mood shifted. At bus stops, people scanned faces, wary of strangers. Mothers gripped their children's hands tighter. Taxi drivers refused fares to Garfield Park after dark. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. Fear turned local. On Thursday, a break that wasn't a break. A woman called in claiming she'd seen a young girl matching Mary Ellen's description near a Greyhound terminal downtown. Marino and 2 officers rushed there. They found the girl. She was 16, from Peoria, running from home. Not Mary Ellen. The disappointment felt heavier than the hope had. Friday marked 1 week. The DeLuca family held a vigil on their block. Candles lined the steps, small flames trembling in the wind. Anna clutched Mary Ellen's photo to her chest. Neighbors gathered close, murmuring prayers in English and Italian. A priest from St. Ignatius led a rosary. When it was over, no one wanted to leave. They stood in silence until the wax melted to puddles. Marino stayed on the edges, hat in hand, unable to meet Sal's eyes. He promised they'd keep looking. He meant it. But deep down, he'd begun to fear what every detective fears, that she was already beyond help. Over the next few days, the search scaled back. The volunteers dwindled. The headlines grew smaller. Chicago moved on, because cities have to. Bills still needed paying. Buses still needed fixing. The world doesn't stop for one missing person. But inside the DeLuca apartment, time didn't move at all. The kitchen clock ticked loud and cruel. Anna stopped teaching. Sal stopped shaving. The Vega was released back to the family, but no one wanted it. He parked it behind the building, threw a tarp over it, and never touched it again. At the precinct, Marino refused to close the file. He called it active missing and checked it every week. He interviewed new witnesses, revisited old ones. He even walked Garfield Park at night, alone, listening for something the city had stopped hearing. He never found it. By summer, the case went cold. Officially, at least. Unofficially, it haunted everyone who had ever said Mary Ellen's name. And in the basement evidence room, under humming fluorescent light, a clerk named Carla Ruiz wrote 3 words on an envelope: victim sweater, sample B, and slid it into a drawer marked hold. It sat there for decades, gathering silence, waiting for the day science would learn how to listen again. The city moved on. The family didn't. The search was over. The panic remained. And in that emptiness, rumors began. When hope dries up, rumor fills the cracks. By May of 1976, the flyers had curled in the rain. The ink ran, the staples rusted, and Mary Ellen's face faded into gray. The official search had quieted. The volunteers had gone home. Only Detective Alan Marino and the DeLuca family were still asking questions out loud. The rest of Chicago whispered. The first rumor was the kind that feels merciful at first. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she needed a break. The city was heavy. The times were changing. Young women were finding their own lives, their own names. It was easier to believe she'd chosen to disappear than to face what it might mean if she hadn't. Then came the darker versions. The boyfriend did it. The classmate did it. The stranger in the park. The janitor from the campus. The priest. Each day a new theory, born on a porch or behind a bar, and each one a small betrayal. Thomas Rivera, the boyfriend, bore the worst of it. He was 22, working nights at the transit depot, tall and soft-spoken. His alibi was solid. He'd clocked in at 10:45 that night and never left his post. Even so, whispers followed him everywhere. When he walked into Miller's diner for breakfast, voices stopped. Someone carved killer into the hood of his car one night while he was sleeping. He scrubbed it off in silence, but the paint never looked the same. He moved apartments that fall, hoping distance could change perception. It didn't. Not in Chicago. Not in a city that remembers sins better than faces. Detective Marino tried to cut through the noise. He checked every report twice, ran every plate number near Garfield Park that week. He interviewed the witnesses again, hoping the fog in their memories might clear. It didn't. Harold Becker, the retired factory worker who lived near the park, swore he'd heard a car idling around midnight. Maybe a door closing. Maybe not. He'd looked out once, seen headlights through the trees, then gone back to bed. He regretted that decision for the rest of his life. Another witness, a teenager named Carla Mendez, said she'd been driving home from a house party. She thought she'd seen someone who looked like Mary Ellen standing by the road near a dark sedan. She couldn't describe the driver. Couldn't swear to the color of the car. Couldn't be sure of the time. The fog had been too thick, the headlights too bright. Each time she retold it, something changed. Black car, then dark green, then maybe blue. Memory isn't a photograph. It's a story that edits itself. By June, Marino's desk was a graveyard of dead leads. He chased each one anyway. A caller from Joliet claimed Mary Ellen had been seen working as a waitress there. It turned out to be another girl, another face. A priest in Little Italy said a man had confessed something in a booth that made his stomach turn, but not enough to break the seal of the confessional. Marino waited outside that church for 3 nights, hoping the man would come back. He didn't. The city moved on. But in Little Italy, People still locked their doors earlier. Mothers walked their daughters to the bus stop. The neighborhood's trust cracked in small, invisible ways. At the DeLuca apartment, silence became routine. Anna stopped teaching for the rest of the school year. She ironed things that didn't need ironing. She left the radio on all day so the house wouldn't sound so empty. Sal went back to work at the transit yard but came home later, as if he could outdrive the grief. Their sons learned not to talk about it unless spoken to first. Detective Marino visited often, even when there was nothing new to say. He'd sit at their table, drink strong coffee, and promise they weren't forgotten. Anna would nod politely, her eyes unfocused, as if she was already half somewhere else listening for footsteps that weren't coming. By August, the case file had grown thick but hollow. Reports stacked without progress. Leads noted, closed, filed. The department had other cases, newer ones, louder ones. Marino fought to keep Mary Ellen's file on his desk, but eventually it was moved to a cabinet marked active pending. He hated that phrase. It meant we don't know what else to do. That fall, the newspapers stopped running her name. There were new headlines: politics, crime, sports. Chicago moved the way cities always do, forward, even when it shouldn't. Rumor, though, never really stopped. By winter, it had evolved into superstition. People said Garfield Park was haunted. That if you stood near the spot where the car had been found, you could hear an engine idling that wasn't there. A jogger claimed to see a girl in a denim jacket walking through the fog. No one believed him, but no one jogged there at night anymore either. Marino tried to ignore the ghost stories. He wasn't built for magic. But some nights, driving home past the park, he'd slow down, roll the window down a crack, and listen. He never heard anything, just the city breathing, the L rumbling, the wind cutting through the trees. But once, he thought he saw a silver glint on a bench under the streetlight. He stopped, got out, walked over. It was a wristwatch. Silver band. Face turned inward. No blood. No prints. He bagged it, tagged it, and wrote the date. August 29th, 1976. Found on bench near Garfield Park. Possible connection. The DeLucas confirmed it wasn't hers. Her watch had a small scratch near the clasp. This one didn't. Still, Marino couldn't let it go. He kept it on his desk for months, as if it might start ticking again and tell him what time she died. By the end of the year, the case was cold. Officially. Unofficially, it haunted every detective who'd ever touched it. Each one kept a copy of her photo in their drawer. Each one promised themselves they'd solve it someday. But the city doesn't remember promises. It only remembers headlines. And by 1977, there weren't any. The watch went into evidence. The sweater stayed sealed. The Vega sat under its tarp, gathering dust. The rumors faded, replaced by newer tragedies. But every few months, someone would mention her name in passing: a neighbor, a classmate, a cop at a bar, and the air would change for a moment. People would go quiet. And then someone would say, "You remember that girl?" And someone else would answer, "Yeah, the one who just vanished." It was the only story that never really ended. It just stopped being told out loud. Time doesn't heal old cases. It buries them in dust and paper. By 1978, Mary Ellen DeLuca had been missing for 2 years. Her file sat in the third drawer of a gray metal cabinet in the Chicago Police Department basement between Robbery West Loop and Missing Juvenile. Someone had written her name in fading blue ink across the tab. The letters were neat, almost gentle. Detective Alan Marino still came down once a week. He'd slide open the drawer, pull the file halfway out, stare at it, then shove it back in. He told himself he was staying familiar with it. In truth, he didn't know what else to do. He'd transferred to the burglary unit by then. Cold cases weren't glamorous. They didn't win elections or promotions. They were ghosts that refused to clock out. Mary Ellen's parents still called him once a month. Anna's voice grew smaller each time. Sal's grew sharper. He blamed the police. He blamed the city. Sometimes, he blamed himself. "I should have driven out there earlier," he'd say, as soon as she was late. Marino never argued. He knew the truth. Guilt is something families invent to feel less powerless. The DeLucas turned the search into ritual. Every April 9th, they attended morning mass. Every October, on what would have been her birthday, They placed flowers near the park bench where her watch had been found. Even in winter, even when the ground was hard as stone. Neighbors learned not to ask why. Anna stopped teaching entirely in 1979. The school held a retirement luncheon for her: punch, cake, polite conversation, but she didn't go. Sal worked until his back gave out, then took early pension. Their sons grew up and moved away, both promising to visit more often than they ever did. The apartment on Taylor Street stayed the same: clean, silent, too large for two people. In 1981, Detective Marino got married. He didn't talk about the case much anymore. His wife knew not to ask when he came home late or woke from dreams he couldn't describe. He'd kept one of the missing posters, folded into quarters, tucked in the back of a desk drawer. Sometimes he'd unfold it just to remind himself she'd been real. The case was officially reclassified as cold in 1983. A memo circulated, polite, bureaucratic. It said, "Pending new evidence." It meant, forgotten until convenient. Carla Ruiz, the evidence clerk who'd labeled the sweater, was still working the same basement. She had 2 kids now, a husband, a mortgage. But she still knew exactly where that envelope was. Sometimes, during slow afternoons, she'd open the locker just to check the seal. Not out of procedure. Out of superstition. She said it felt wrong to leave it unseen for too long. In 1985, a new detective named Denise Morales joined the department. She was 24, fresh out of academy, full of impossible energy. During orientation, Marino told the rookies about the DeLuca case, his way of warning them that not everything ends cleanly. Morales listened. She wrote the name down in her notebook. Then she underlined it. By 1990, Anna DeLuca's hands shook too much to hold a pen. Sal's heart wasn't strong anymore. They still sent letters to the department every Christmas, the same line repeated each year. "Please don't give up on her." Marino answered every one. "Still open," he'd write. It wasn't true anymore, but it wasn't a lie either. The file was still there. That counted for something. In the spring of 1995, DNA testing started showing up in police seminars. Marino, now close to retirement, attended one out of curiosity. The presenter said that even a trace of biological material could identify a killer decades later. Marino thought of the sweater. He called Carla Ruiz the next day. She confirmed it was still sealed, still intact. But the lab said the sample was too small, too old. The technology wasn't ready. Not yet. That same year, Mary Ellen's father died. Heart failure. At the funeral, Marino stood by the casket and felt the weight of every unsolved report in the city pressing down on him. He promised Anna he'd keep trying. She nodded like she didn't believe him but was too tired to say so. She followed him 3 years later, stroke, sudden and merciful. Their sons arranged a joint headstone at St. Joseph Cemetery. There's a blank space between their names where a third was meant to go. They left it empty. By 2000, Chicago was a different city. Gentrified blocks. New faces. The old neighborhoods, unrecognizable. Most of the officers who'd worked Mary Ellen's case were gone. Marino retired that year, clearing out his desk in silence. He left one thing behind, a thin blue folder labeled DeLuca, M.E. He slipped a note inside. "If you ever get the chance to test the sweater, do it." He walked out without looking back. In the basement, Carla Ruiz kept her promise. When the department switched from paper to digital evidence logs, she manually entered every case. When she reached Mary Ellen's, she hesitated. She typed the words carefully. Sample B, preserved condition. Do not discard. In 2006, the cold case unit was reorganized. Younger detectives took over. Denise Morales, now seasoned and unshakable, was assigned a section of the archive. She read through dozens of old files. When she opened Mary Ellen's, the paper smelled faintly of smoke and age. She saw the note Marino had left. She read it twice. Then she smiled, just a little. Because she believed in timing. In 2015, the State Crime Lab upgraded its DNA systems again. They sent out a memo encouraging departments to resubmit old evidence. Morales remembered the sweater. She called the archive, requested sample B. Carla Ruiz, now gray-haired and part-time, personally walked it to the courier. It was the last item she ever handled before retiring. The lab technicians opened it with gloves and reverence. They scraped a trace, smaller than a pinhead, from the fabric. They loaded it into the sequencer. They waited. Machines hummed, lights blinked, data crawled across screens. Then the result appeared, not enough for a full profile, but enough for a partial. Enough to hold on to until technology could do the rest. That took another decade. But science is patient. So was Morales. While the world moved forward, smartphones, social media, new crimes with faster answers, a single sweater sat in cold storage, humming quietly with possibility. Mary Ellen's case became a story detectives told new recruits, the one that got away. A ghost of a girl who vanished into a Chicago night and never came back. They told it to warn each other that justice doesn't run on a schedule. They didn't know that justice was listening. Because in 2024, the call finally came from the lab. The trace had been sequenced, mapped, and entered into the genealogy database. A distant cousin, a name, a family tree that pointed toward a single living man, a janitor who'd lived 2 blocks from Garfield Park his whole life. His name was Frank Lanski. The file drawer opened again. The dust lifted. And after 49 years of silence, the city was about to remember what it had tried to forget. 49 years after she vanished, the story woke up. It began quietly, the way big things do. An email pinged into the inbox of Detective Denise Morales just after 8 a.m. on a Tuesday in March 2024. The subject line read, "Genealogy match, DeLuca case." She almost deleted it by reflex. Most of those alerts were false positives, background noise in a database that had grown too good at guessing. But something in her gut said open it. Inside was a single paragraph from the Illinois State Crime Lab. The partial DNA profile recovered from sample B, victim sweater, had returned a familial match, a distant relative on a public genealogy site, traced through a third cousin once removed. The probability was small. The lead, fragile. But it was something. And in cold cases, something is a miracle. Morales leaned back in her chair, heart kicking once, hard. She whispered the name out loud, Mary Ellen DeLuca. It sounded foreign, almost like summoning. She printed the report and took it straight to the cold case task unit upstairs. Detective Ron Sabo, her partner, met her halfway. "What's got you running?" he asked. She handed him the page. He read it twice. "Genealogy," he said softly. Then louder, "Jesus, after 50 years." Within hours, the task force was meeting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. Maps spread across the table, the old case file beside a sleek laptop. The same photo from 1976, Mary Ellen smiling, sunlight in her hair sat in the center, a silent witness. The lab report listed a name tied to the genetic hit, Ellen Lanski, age 59, living in Wisconsin. A match at the level of a second cousin. The family tree, once built out through genealogical software, pointed toward a small cluster of relatives, originally from Chicago's West Side, one branch, ending with Frank Joseph Lanski, born 1947, retired maintenance worker, current address, Cicero. Morales had seen that surname once before. In the original case notes, in handwriting faded but legible, Lanski, F, questioned, released. He'd been a janitor at the high school near Garfield Park in the 70s. Interviewed in the first week after the disappearance. Said he'd been working the night shift, cleaning classrooms. No record of follow-up. Just one line, no further interest. That line hit Morales like a punch. She pulled the old witness list from the file, compared addresses, times. Lanski's house back then had been 4 blocks from where Mary Ellen's Vega was found. He'd lived alone. He'd had a dark green Ford sedan registered in his name. Same model mentioned in the conflicting witness statements. The pieces began to hum faint but undeniable, like a radio finding a signal through static. By mid-afternoon, Morales called the genealogy analyst from the state lab. "How strong is the link?" she asked. "Strong enough to get a warrant," the analyst said. 17 shared centimorgans across 2 chromosomes. "You're not chasing smoke here." That night, Morales went home but didn't sleep. She reread the entire case file at her kitchen table, page by brittle page. The names, the interviews, the photos of the Vega under floodlights. She stared longest at the evidence log, the entry for sample B, victim sweater. a piece of cloth that had waited half a century to speak. By morning, she'd made her decision. She called the district attorney's office, requested a meeting. The DA, a practical man who'd seen too many dead ends, raised an eyebrow when he heard genealogy. But when Morales laid out the data, the connections, the proximity, the vehicle, he nodded slowly. "You can run surveillance," he said. "But be quiet about it. If this blows up and he's innocent, I'm not carrying it." Morales smiled, tired but certain. "He's not innocent," she said. They started watching Frank Lanski that week. 77 years old. Lived in a small brick bungalow in Cicero. Still drove himself to the grocery store every Thursday. Same time, same route. Neighbors described him as polite, private. "Talks about baseball," one said. "Shovels his own driveway," another added. "Harmless. Ordinary." But ordinary men had fooled this city before. Surveillance teams rotated shifts, collecting routine: what time he left, who he saw, where he ate. He went nowhere suspicious. He didn't seem to notice the unmarked cars parked down the block. When he took his trash out one morning, Morales watched from across the street, her heart thudding. Inside the bin, on top of a tied kitchen bag, she saw a paper coffee cup lipstick mark, saliva ring. She nodded to the team. Evidence techs retrieved it as soon as he went back inside. The cup went straight to the lab. Swabbed, sealed, logged. They called it control sample, Lanski, F. Forensic comparison took 3 days. On Friday afternoon, the analyst called Morales personally. "I don't know how you stayed patient this long," she said, voice shaking. "But it's him. It's a full match. The odds are 1 in 22 trillion. Morales didn't answer at first. She just looked out the window at the city, sun cutting across the skyline, and thought of a 19-year-old girl who never made it home. Then she said quietly, "Let's go get him." Saturday morning, March 23rd, 2024. The Cicero neighborhood woke to the sound of sirens that weren't speeding past, they were stopping. 3 police vehicles, 1 unmarked sedan, all pulling up outside a red brick bungalow with white shutters. Neighbors peered from windows, confused. Inside, Frank Lanski was at his kitchen table, reading the sports section. He looked up when the knock came. Detective Morales stood at the door, badge in hand. "Frank Joseph Lanski?" "Yes." "I'm Detective Morales, Chicago Police. We need to talk about something from 1976. He blinked, confused at first, then wary. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Who?" he asked. "Mary Ellen DeLuca." He went pale. The paper slipped from his fingers. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he whispered, "After all this time?" Morales nodded. "Yes, after all this time." He didn't resist when they cuffed him. He didn't speak on the ride downtown. He just stared out the window at the city rolling past, older, brighter, unrecognizable, and murmured something under his breath that no one caught. At the station, they took his DNA swabs under consent for verification. The results came back identical. Every test confirmed the same thing. The trace found on the sweater belonged to him. The match was clean. The math was impossible to ignore. Outside, the press had already gathered. Headlines were writing themselves. Chicago cold case solved after 49 years. Arrest shocks Garfield Park community. Inside, Morales stared at the mugshot as it printed. An old man, tired, eyes distant, but behind them, something calculating, something that had once been confident enough to bury a girl and believe the city would forget. She thought of Detective Marino, long retired, maybe gone by now. She thought of the note he'd left. "If you ever get the chance to test the sweater, do it." She wished she could tell him she had. But this wasn't over yet. Not even close. They had the match. Now they needed the truth. And the truth, like everything else in this case, would come slowly, one painful piece at a time. 49 years after she vanished, the case finally cracked. Detective Denise Morales almost missed the email subject line, "Genealogy match, DeLuca case." The old sweater, Sample B, had spoken at last. A partial DNA sequence, cross-referenced through public ancestry data, pointed to one family name, Lanski. Morales froze. She'd seen that name buried in the 1976 witness list. Frank Joseph Lanski, janitor, Garfield Park High, lived 4 blocks from where Mary Ellen's car was found. Questioned, released. No follow-up. Now his family DNA sat on her screen, glowing like a ghost waving from the past. Within a week, the cold case task unit had eyes on him. 77 years old. Still in Cicero, living alone. Quiet, polite, routine. Thursday, grocery runs. Sunday, mass. A man invisible by design. They collected his trash, found a paper coffee cup, swabbed the rim. 3 days later, the state lab called. The analyst said only one sentence. It's him. The match was absolute. 1 in 22 trillion. The same man who swept classrooms in 1976 had left his DNA on Mary Ellen's sweater. Saturday morning, police cars rolled into his block like a slow tide. Morales knocked. Frank Joseph Lanski, we need to talk about Mary Ellen DeLuca. He stared at her, the name landing like a blow. He didn't resist. He didn't ask how. Just whispered, I didn't think you'd ever find me. At the station, the confession came in fragments. He'd seen her walking alone that night, offered a ride. She'd smiled, polite, trusting, and gotten in. When she realized he wasn't driving toward home, she panicked. He grabbed her arm, then her throat. It happened fast, he said. I didn't mean to. I just wanted her quiet. He buried her near the park, under cover of fog, then went to work the next morning like nothing happened. For decades, he'd passed the flyers, the vigils, the rumors, all of it, and said nothing. Now, under sterile light and a lifetime of guilt, he finally did. The state charged him with murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. He pled guilty. Died in prison a year later, before trial could end. For the DeLuca family, justice came as an echo, late but real. Detective Morales stood at the press podium, the old photo of Mary Ellen beside her. She was 19, she said. She deserved a full life. Today, we gave her name back. After the cameras left, she opened the evidence locker one last time. Inside, the envelope marked Sample B sat empty now, its mystery finally gone. She closed it gently and whispered, You can rest. Outside, Garfield Park was quiet. The L train groaned overhead, the city moving on, as it always had. But for once, the story had an ending.